leftovers, or the DMV,
Number 97,
or house cleaning, or
Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, I'm David Eagleman. I have a new podcast called Inner Cosmos on iHeart. I'm going to explore the relationship between our brains and our experiences by tackling unusual questions like, can we create new senses for humans? So join me weekly to uncover how your brain steers your behavior, your perception, and your reality. Listen to Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The thing that I'm most nosy about is other people's finances. I just want to ask people, how much money do you make, and what have you figured out about money that the rest of us haven't? I'm Maya Lau, and this is Other People's Pockets, the show where I ask people about their money, because salary transparency is important, and because we can all learn something from other people's financial mistakes and money hacks. Other People's Pockets is a co-production of Pushkin Industries and Little Everywhere. Listen to Other People's Pockets on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi there, I'm Zach Braff.
And I'm Donald Faison.
We're real-life best friends, but we met playing fake-life best friends, Turk and JD, on the sitcom Scrubs.
20 years later, we've decided to rewatch the series one episode at a time and put our memories into a podcast you can listen to at home.
We're going to get all our special guest friends like Sarah Chalk, John C. McGinley, Neil Flynn, Judy Reyes.
Show creator Bill Lawrence, editors, writers, and even prop masters will tell us about what inspired the series and how we became a family.
You can listen to the podcast Fake Doctors, Real Friends with Zach and Donald on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm excited to tell you about DripDrop. They are an electrolyte powder developed by a doctor to treat dehydration. It works super fast, has 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of sports drinks. Try it before a run, after a workout, or I've been doing the sauna recently. It is a great treat after that 40 to 50 minutes of sweating. So go to DripDrop.com and use the code WORDS to get 20% off your purchase. That's DripDrop.com and use the code WORDS. I love this stuff so much. Try it. You will not be sorry. Now, here's the show. Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm Ray Harkins. We are hanging out on this beautiful podcast, 100 Words or Less. And man, I'm not going to lie. I am exhausted. It's mostly mentally. Starting a new job, it's rough. But hold on. You are coming here to talk about independent music. Obviously, that's why you downloaded this thing. That's why you're listening to it, streaming it, whatever. Maybe it's a couple years in the future. Maybe it's like, 2022, and you're like, hey, I'm going to check out this episode from 2019, which is just wild, but it's awesome. Mike Score is the guest this week. He's the vocalist from All Out War, which is, I would put them in the legendary status of pioneers of metal, hardcore, hybrid, metalcore, whatever you want to call it. But they're heavy, they're pissed. And I remember buying their, for those who were crucified, I think, if I'm not mistaken, on Victory, and just falling in love with it immediately. It was like, dude, what's up with these guys? I've actually never seen them upon further reflection after I did this interview with Mike, but just a really, really good band. So I had to have Mike on because, they put out a new record, so you should check that out as well. But let's talk about band merch, please. Rockabilia.com is the only place that you need to go in order to buy your band merch. They have hoodies, long sleeves, whatever it is you are into, they've got it. And it's fast shipping, great customer service, everything you could possibly want and more, including it's all officially licensed. It's not some horrible bootleg because, man, that stuff sucks, right? I've definitely fallen victim to it. Like, buy a bootleg, wash it once, boom, it's like the worst screen ever. It all fades out and you're just like, man, this is a nightmare. And then in the back of your head, you're like, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure this is a bootleg. I'm pretty sure this is not what I wanted. And then plus the band doesn't get paid for it, which is terrible. So go to rockabilia.com, use the code PCJabberjaw, that gets you 10% off, and boom, there you go. Loving it. What else do I got to tell you? Well, first of all, the downloads have been going very, very well in the show recently, which that means you are spreading the word, and I appreciate that because that's the only way that this thing is getting to the appropriate people's ears. So rate the podcast on whatever podcast catcher you are using, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Overcast or whatever it is you're using. Just rank it. When I say rank it, give it a rating, 5 stars or whatever you're feeling. Just tell people about that show on that platform. And then also subscribe, because that way you are getting all of the new episodes delivered directly to your phone or whatever it is you're using to listen to this thing on, because that all that stuff helps the show. And frankly, it helps other people find out about their show, which is that's the whole thing I'm doing. That's not the whole reason I'm doing this, but I just want the people to care about this thing to be exposed to it. Okay? Got it? All right. Next week is a big one. The 7-year anniversary of this podcast, which is absolutely crazy to say out loud, but 7 years is next week, and man, we got a real fun chat for you. The royal we, as it were, because you're, even though you're just maybe a listener of the podcast, you're contributing in some way, shape, or form, right? Maybe you're interacting with the advertisers, or I don't know what you're doing, but yeah, that's what what's happening next week. And I'm also going to change some music. There'll be a lot of changes next week, which will be fun. So Mike Score, like I said, is a vocalist for All Out War, upstate New York hardcore legends, as it were. And Mike was such a great chat. I really enjoyed getting to know him a bit, and just kind of sharing in some of the commonalities that him and I had. I mean, I've, for whatever reason, always played a lot of shows up in the upstate New York area, and spent a decent amount of time in Syracuse and Buffalo, and played some shows in Albany. And every time I played up in those areas, it was always great. Played Rochester. I don't think I've ever actually played Poughkeepsie, but it was great. And honestly, every show that I've played in downtown New York City, Manhattan proper, hasn't been very good. And so I was always really excited to play shows around New York that weren't in Manhattan. But anyways, that's what we're doing here. And here is Mike, and I will talk to you, of course, after the episode is over, and let you know about what's happening next week for our 7th anniversary. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. So yes, here we go. I'm 38 years old, raised in the Southern California area. And so my first exposure to you guys was, basically once you put out, For Those Who Were Crucified, we're on Victory. And, by that time I was a total tried and true Victory kid of, Strife, Earth Crisis, Snapcase, Dead Guy, all that stuff. And it struck me where listening to what you guys were doing was very much oh yeah, obviously it's the collision of metal and hardcore, a lot of, not a lot, but bands Ringworm, Integrity. And then now, I guess in more modern times, a band like Power Trip lies right in between both of those worlds, where you're never home in each of, you're never home at a metal show, or you're never home at a hardcore show, I presume it's one of those things, as you've watched your band evolve over time and playing to different audiences. Is that always kind of just the way that it has been for you, where it's oh yeah, we're, we can play all these different bills, but we're never fully making sense in one or the other. And then you guys obviously don't care, because you continue to create the music that you do. I just wanted to see how that kind of what your view on that was.
Well, I mean, that's perfect. That's how it's been since the beginning of the band. We've always played in both scenes, and we don't really consider ourselves part of either scene either. So right. It would make sense that people are sort of confused on where we fit in. We recently played with Death Angel, and the night before that we played a hardcore show, or a whatever you want to call it, show in Canada, in where were we? Calgary. So we played both shows, and we're laughing amongst ourselves about, wow, we didn't really fit in on either one of these shows.
Sure.
But we do what we do, and it's been that way for a long time, and we'll keep it that way for a long time.
Sure. Well, and I think a lot of that has to do, and tell me what you think of this, where, a lot of people that straddle both scenes, and when I say straddle, it's like you said, you're not, you're not intending to kind of be delivered to one or the other, but, usually you get kind of your first taste of music, whether you're a metal kid or a hardcore kid, and then your taste starts to evolve and you start to go to shows of different genres. But people from a categorical perspective always have to place you in one or the other. But it's never black or white. It's always that gray area where, yes, of course, a band like Sick of It All is considered a hardcore band, but at one point they were being pushed towards being a metal band or whatever. And so, it's kind of just I guess maybe it's the ethics or the way that you approach like being in a band as opposed to the sort of sound that you, I guess, have ultimately.
Right. I would say this. Musically, we are definitely influenced more by metal, without a doubt. I mean, when the music I draw my influences for, like, especially when we sit down to write music, is coming from the metal world. Lyrically, a little bit of both, but as far as the ethics, we've always been drawn to the DIY side of the hardcore world. That's always been our, I guess, our connection to the hardcore world.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Is the ethics.
Sure.
We've always, been drawn to that. We've always liked the community aspect of hardcore, and I think that's our connection there.
Totally. Yeah. I think for many years I worked at Century Media Records, signing bands and doing that stuff. And, I came from the hardcore scene and played in hardcore bands. And I definitely I knew that division obviously existed just by attending shows, but then understanding the mentality of like your tried and true average metalhead fan, or band from that perspective that didn't have the DIY component attached to it, where it was like, I'll never forget, I'm not going to name the band, but like the moment they started to like tour in the States, they thought that they obviously deserved, like 7 buses and like, and I was like, no, what are you talking about? Like you tour in a van, right? Like you're not making that much money. So why would you tour in a bus? You can't afford that.
Right. Well, I would think that was probably a European band, because you're really treated a lot different in Europe, especially, when we first started going to Europe, we were shocked that you get a bus. We had no idea we were going to get a bus.
Right.
It was like, wow, we're used to driving around in vans. The axles are breaking in, and all of a sudden we get a bus. Well, you must not know who we are, but cool, we'll take it.
Totally. Well, I think a lot of that too is just the safety issue where it's like, oh yeah, like a lot of times you clearly have no idea where you're going, and you need a person to make sure that you don't die on these, ridiculously treacherous mountain roads or whatever.
All right.
Yeah. So kind of putting the focus on you as a person, were you born and raised in the upstate New York area, or where did you kind of come up?
I was born and raised in upstate New York. I'm still here. Never going to leave here. I love. That's about it.
Sure. What, because most people that have the experience like you of being able to compare and contrast different areas when you've come through on tour and stuff like that, I guess what, beyond the familial connections and, the fact that you've lived there for so long, what draws you back to that area more than anything else?
Well, I guess, and I can tie this into music too. I guess what draws me or keeps me here is, a lot of things. But if I'm going to talk about music, I grew up in an area where there really was no real scene. So I'm close enough to New York City where I could go to shows there. And I can always experience New York City, even without, music aside, I can go to New York City if I want to. It takes, 45 minutes on the train. If I want to go to New York City, I can go there. If I want the peace and quiet of upstate New York, well, I have that too, because we're sort of in like this weird no man's land in between New York City and Albany.
Sure.
So you have the quietness of where we are, but at any time, it's not that big of a hassle to go to the city either.
Totally.
So I guess that's one thing that I really enjoy about the area.
Right. Like you're a stone's throw away from, clearly one of the biggest cities in the world, but you can disconnect to where you're like, I don't need New York for about a month or two. Like, let me just chill out here.
You hit it on the head exactly. Okay. I can disconnect from, I can, if I wanted to be, I could be like a total, like off the grid, like, hey, I'm just going to hide up here and no one's going to find me. I could totally do that if I wanted to. Or, I could always be in the city. I mean, when I was younger, I was always in the city. I always was going to the city for shows or just to hang out. And now I find myself, as I get older, going to the city less and less.
Sure. Yeah. You have more reasons to stay there than, try to find activity in the city or whatever. So, yeah, that makes sense. And what was your, I guess, what was your family structure like? Brothers and sisters, mom and dad in the house? What did that look like?
I have one sister, mom and dad.
Got
typical.
It. So yeah, very, I guess, idyllic suburban upraising.
Right.
Sure. And what did your parents do for, I guess, a trade or job or anything like that? Were they, involved in, industry, teaching? What did they do?
My father was a health inspector for the state. So he basically, environmental issues, things like that. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom.
Nice. So she had, and are you the oldest of you and your sister, or are you the youngest?
No, I'm the youngest.
Got it. So you were the spoiled baby, as they say. No.
Sure. Well, that's what she thinks. That's, I'm sure, what she thought. Yeah.
Sure. And what kind of kid, as you started to develop an identity and, go to junior high and high school and all that sort of stuff, who kind of were you? Were you like a sports kid? Did you care about school? Like, what did you look like?
Very quiet. Did not care about school. Didn't really fit in anywhere. Sort of a loner, I guess you'd say. I found a home in music. I connected with music. I could hide away with music. That was basically it.
Got it.
The strange thing is I as a kid wanted nothing to do with school, and here I am. I'm a history teacher.
Right. Yeah. Irony there.
So I mean.
And what did you like you said, you were quiet and you kind of, kept to yourself. Was it, you were kind of, building these sort of, imaginary worlds, and like, were you into, sci-fi and fantasy? Were you like reading a lot? Did you like drawing, or you were just like, I'm just trying to find my tribe, so to speak?
Just trying to find my tribe. Like I enjoyed sports. I played sports, as a kid, especially in junior high, but I never fit in with those kids at all. So I played, I liked sports, especially, baseball. I really enjoyed baseball, but I just didn't fit in with the herd. It wasn't my thing. And after a while, I just realized, this is not a place where I fit in at all.
Sure.
So I sort of drifted away from that, and I just started to really get into music. I mean, I always liked music at a young age. I mean, my father listened to, like, I remember, the Bob Dylan Desire album. I loved that record as a kid. I still do now. And from there, I just started to like get into more aggressive stuff, and then it just became like collecting music and reading music magazines and stuff like that, and opened me up to a whole new world, which is fantastic.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing that's more exciting than when you start to feel like you have that control and authorship over your own music taste, where you're like, oh yeah, like I like Bob Dylan, but then I also, I don't know what the Slayer band is. Like, what's up with this? Or, you start to experiment and see what that means to you.
Right, definitely.
And who was kind of the, because usually people have like either friends or older siblings or kind of, and I don't use this word like in a bad way, like gatekeepers who help you kind of usher through, kind of giving you mixtapes or whatever. Did you have any of those people in your life, or was this like you really just kind of taking stabs in the dark and figuring out, what these bands were that you enjoyed?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, there was a lot of older guys that went on the bus, that
Sure.
that had Iron Maiden jackets or whatever. And there were a lot of like local bands. And I remember, there were these older guys that had this band called Demoniac, which was really great. To me at the time was really great. And then there was a local band called Primeval that actually, they went on to do some things. I think they're even still together today. Mm-hmm. And, I just kind of got into that stuff. And then there was an older guy that was friends with one of my friend's older brothers, and he started taking us to shows. Like, we would just tag along. They would all go, and this guy had a station wagon, and we used to get into the back of the station wagon. All of us guys that were like, 12 and 13 or whatever, we would get in the back of the station wagon, and we'd be in the back, and those guys would be in the front, and we'd go all over to shows like, City Gardens in Trenton, which is no longer at Lemoore. All sorts of places we would go to shows. And it was, like I said, it was just a whole new world, man. It was great.
Sure. And did your mom and dad, like, as you started to bring home the, the adventures of what you were going to all these shows and traveling and seeing all these bands, were your parents ever, I guess, concerned? Like, oh no, Mike's getting into this, really heavy stuff that we don't understand. How are we going to bring him back? Like, was there any concern with that?
Well, I think at first there definitely was, especially, it was weird though. Now that I'm thinking back, like I remember I don't remember much of a backlash with a lot of the Slayer stuff and Venom, but I actually went to see Nuclear Assault, and Broken Bones was opening, and I bought this shirt, and it had the word shit on the back of it. And I'll never forget, like, I had it, I was probably 14. I had the shirt, and all of a sudden I'm walking through the living room, and I just feel a hand just grab the shirt and just rip it off my back, all because of the word shit. Now, I've been wearing like hella weight shirts, keep in mind, this whole time, and Venom shirts, and, no pushback at all. And then that one word set my father off. And then after that, we got a really huge fight about it. And then things just kind of settled down. And with my father that was letting me go to CBGB's at like 15 years old, from upstate New York, he'd drop us off at the bus station, which was really funny because, in the 80s, he's letting us go to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which was like nothing like what it is now. It was fucking mess back then. And for somebody that had such a problem with the Broken Bones shirt, he was pretty look the other way on that. So
sure,
yeah, strange things from my adolescence.
Well, I really appreciate that story, because I think it shows that, especially once parents, and I'm sure you've experienced this to a certain extent, that, once you're a parent and you start to see your kids get into things that, it doesn't have to be threatening, but just like you don't understand, like you don't have a context for, that's when you start to go, I wonder about that. But like the moment that your dad sees the word shit, he's like, I understand that. My kid should not be wearing the word shit on his shirt. This is going out of here.
Right.
That's so
and I'll have another story, and I don't even know why I would show him this. And I can't remember off the top of my head if it was DRI dealing with it or Cryptic Slaughter, but you know how like bands don't really do this anymore, but back in the day, on vinyl, bands used to etch things as you got closer to the center, and one of the records was it said, "What are you looking at, Dick Nose?" And for some reason, I thought it was hilarious, and I thought I should show my father, who didn't think it was even as close to as funny as I thought it was, but I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, so that was my two: the Dick Nose thing and the shit on the back of the shirt. But
yeah,
Venom, no problem.
No problem.
Yeah.
Black metal.
Venom, no problem.
Yeah.
Right. All that stuff. No issues there. But those two things, and I think you're exactly right. He got that. He like the other stuff.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Trust me in saying that therapy is an incredible tool for as you are traveling through life, because who you are as a person, 5 or 10 years ago is maybe a completely different version of yourself, because we run into challenges, whether it's work, whether it's life stuff, relationships, all of those things you can work through with a therapist. And that is why I love BetterHelp and what they do. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and then you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Ray to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/Ray. Dip in, give therapy a try, and become a better person.
Leftovers. Or the DMV.
Number 97.
Or house cleaning. Or
Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, I'm David Eagleman. I have a new podcast called Inner Cosmos on iHeart. I'm a neuroscientist and an author at Stanford University, and I've spent my career exploring the 3-pound universe in our heads. On my new podcast, I'm going to explore the relationship between our brains and our experiences by tackling unusual questions so we can better understand our lives and our realities. Like, does time really run in slow motion when you're in a car accident? Or can we create new senses for humans? Or what does dreaming have to do with the rotation of the planet? So join me weekly to uncover how your brain steers your behavior, your perception, and your reality. Listen to Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It was sort of like hidden symbolism to him, maybe, or just whatever, rock and roll, whatever. And then that stuff was a little bit too much in your face.
Yep, sure, no, totally. I also like that story that you just shared is such a what I like to call kid logic, because in your head you're like, dude, this is so funny. Like, they put dick nose on this, and like, you know what? My dad's kind of a funny guy. Like, we can share this moment of humor. And then you show it to him, and it's like, oh, I miscalculated this. I'm sorry. This is funny to me and not you.
Yeah, shouldn't have done that.
No, that's beautiful. And it also, if I'm not mistaken, because I've only been through your town and area just a couple times on tour, but there's that record store, Rock Fantasy, right? Like in that general area.
Rock Fantasy.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And that, like, I mean, when I stepped into that store, it felt like, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but like, it felt like such a flashback to where that store, it's changed and evolved. And obviously they have, they sell DVDs there and stuff like that now. But, it definitely felt like there was a component of it that was very much like, hey, if you want to get into the, counterculture, left of center stuff, like, you got to come here. I'm imagining that was like a huge store for you because being in that general area.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Right. I went there all the time. I still go there all the time. I'm friends with Steve, the owner. He's actually sponsoring our record release show for this record.
Nice.
Everybody from this area, that was their place, And I mean, when we actually had a scene, that was the epicenter, that was it. I mean, that was the place. Everybody met at that place. You met up there and then you went to the shows, because Middletown actually used to have like quite a few venues. Like, they had this venue called the Rock Palace, which I am not exaggerating when I say that it is probably the size of the average middle class homes living room. It was so small. It didn't have a stage, but like Creator and Coroner played there. And I remember thinking Creator must be so bumped. Like, I don't know how because this was in 89, when Creator was already well past that, but besides that, so they had Creator, Sepultura played there. But at the same time, Underdog played there, Sick of It All played there, Token Entry played there. And it was like a stone's throw from Rock Fantasy. So, I mean, you would go Rock Fantasy, you would buy records, and then you would walk over to the show. And a lot of those shows were on Sundays, which is perfect. And then there was another place that predates that called the Grunge Club, which was basically just, if you remember driving to Rock Fantasy, which I don't know if you do, there's like a million like old warehouses going up to it. And there was a room in the warehouse called the Grunge Club, and like Sheer Terror played there. Are you familiar with Where the Wild Things Are?
Yeah, of course.
The compilation.
The comp, yeah.
The picture of Paul laying on the ground on the back, that was taken at the Grunge Club.
Nice
in Middletown, New York. So
you can make you can make a great Sunday afternoon, like you said. Just go record shopping, and then go to the show, and there you go, whole day.
Yeah, I Rock Fantasy holds a lot of great memories for me. Like a lot of records that I bought came from there, you know, because it was like there was the mall and you could obviously get whatever there. But if you wanted your underground stuff, that's where you went.
Totally. No, that's cool. I like that. And I think that, especially for, so many scenes in that, particular area, not only in New York, but, ones that are just kind of like off the beaten path that, you're like maybe an hour or two outside of a major city. There's such this burgeoning, whatever you call it, B market tour or cities that, have such a rich interest in, all of the, metal, hardcore and all that stuff. And it's like, it's this weird hodgepodge of all of these interests and all these kids that exist there. And some can go in the city like you were able to, and then some can't, but it builds up this weird scene that, might just last for a couple of years. But then some, like you said, with Rock Fantasy and the fact that, many different bands have kind of come from your general area, can only be fostered by that, like you said, that point of entry being a really cool record store or a comic book store or whatever the case may be.
Right.
Yeah. And so it struck me that your general area, like like you mentioned, kind of a lot of the shows that you were going to, a lot of it was really rooted in, metal, and that was kind of your first experience. And like you said, a lot of the records you were buying. And as you started to kind of understand the, DIY, component of what hardcore brought to the table, was it just kind of the idea of you being able to do something without asking permission that was of interest to you? Or was there something else that kind of sparked that, like, oh, here, I noticed a difference between those two?
You're asking me the difference between metal and hardcore?
Yeah,
just how I got into hardcore?
Just like when you recognize that there was a distinct difference between those two scenes, even though sonically it might kind of be similar.
Well, I remember buying, Cro-Mag's Age of Quarrel and not realizing that it was, especially being from upstate New York and being this young, not even realizing that it was, I knew it sounded different, but it was still just metal to me. Agnostic Front was metal to me until I started going to shows. And then I started seeing like, skinheads, and I started seeing like different shirts. And then I started going to like crossover shows. And really it was like going to those, like I went, to see Creator, but DRI played, and then I went to see Nuclear Assault and Broken Bones played and stuff like that. And then I just started being like, what is this stuff? And then I started just realizing, wow, these shows, you can be like so up close, and there's no separation between the bands and the crowd, and that's what really drew me to hardcore. And then lyrically it was so different. Lyrically it was saying something, and it was like relatable, and it was things that I was going through, and the connection came. And then I started to obviously realize, well, there's difference, how these shows go down. It's different. There's no barriers. You're buying T-shirts from the guys in the band, not some roadie. So that was cool. I could ask them questions. I could, and as like a kid looking to belong somewhere, hardcore was very much like something that you could grab hold of.
Sure.
So, I always liked the metal stuff, especially sonically. I always liked the metal stuff, but the hardcore scene itself was very, it felt like very accepting. Not that I didn't feel accepted in the metal world, but it was like, it was just different, it was totally different. And like I said, then I went from CBGB's, and then I discovered the Anthrax in Connecticut, which was not that far. And again, like, this location was perfect because, especially for hardcore, because I could go to CBGB's, I could go to the Anthrax, and then they had stuff going on in Albany where, the colleges were putting on shows. And then, New Paltz, New York, where I live now, the college is right here. And they were putting on shows. Like, I saw Murphy's Law in the student union building. I saw, there's a song on the SOD record, Pi Alpha Nu, which is about this town, and so I could go to DIY shows here. And then all of a sudden it just became much more convenient to go to hardcore shows because you discovered, wow, these things are popping up in people's basements.
Sure. Yeah.
Where metal shows, you had to go, and it was, and don't get me wrong, like I said, the metal shows were great too, because they were an event, but hardcore was becoming much more accessible to me.
Sure. It made it real to you. Right. Like, yeah. Cause right. Those, like you said, all of those things, can be, they're entertaining and they're awesome, but a lot of times they don't feel, tangible to a kid, especially if you're like, oh, like, whatever, every kid sees Metallica and is like, oh yeah, I want to play in a band, but you're like, wow, that's like a million miles away. Whereas like if you see a person playing a garage, you're like, oh, that's like a mile away. So yeah, I totally understand.
Right. And I think hardcore also showed me, wow, I can be in a band. Where metal, it was like, wow, this is great, but I can't do that. But hardcore,
yeah, I can.
It was much more. Yeah, like, these people are all just hanging out.
Totally. And so, I mean, clearly, like when you started to, see this more real thing right in front of you, were you immediately taken by the fact that you like wanted to play in a band? Where did that kind of, I mean, because All Out War probably wasn't the very first band that you played in, or was it?
I messed around with my friends, where I would play bass, and then I sang a little bit in some bands that, were really just basically like trying to be Raw Deal or something like that never really left the basement. And then what happened was there was this local band called AWOL, and which basically morphed into All Out War. And AWOL was the local band, and they needed a singer to play like their final show because something happened with their singer. So, I said, well, I'll do it, but I got these ideas for some other songs, so let's sort of mess with that. And we sort of, had Destined to Burn, which was the first All Out War song, but was also actually the last AWOL song. And we played their last show, and right around that time, Chris from Marauder had just moved to Newburgh. So he was still in Marauder, and so he still had those connections, and he moved, and I never forget the night we met, and we were at some like typical suburban like keg party, and the party got broken up by the cops, like all parties up here always did. And I see this guy running from the police because everybody was running. We were in the car, and he had a DMS jacket. And we were familiar with all of that stuff. And we just said, hey, you jump in, because we had a car to get away from, the craziness.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, it was like, wow. We started talking about music, and he was the guitar player for Marauder. And all of a sudden, boom, we just started writing music with him, too. And then AWOL morphed into All Out War. And
got it.
I guess that was the long way to get.
No, that's
that.
the genesis of it all. And were you? Did you sing for AWOL? Because I didn't know if you were that.
I sang one show, their last show.
Okay, their last. Just wanted to make sure. It's like were you ever attracted to another instrument? Were you ever like, oh, I want to try drums, but I've got other people.
No,
who already play this.
I tried to play guitar a little bit. I was serviceable with the bass, but never drums or anything. Just mess around with guitar, and I can play Fade to Black,
sure,
stuff like that.
Yeah, you're like, I got the basic power chords and some riffs here and there.
Yeah, I can do that.
Sure. And clearly, like as All Out War started to play shows and exist and put out music, there was never, especially at that time too, in the early 90s, there was no notion of a hardcore band. I mean, of course, there's a few things that you could point at where it's like, oh yeah, bands were able to quote unquote make a living or whatever. I'm going to presume that All Out War never existed with the idea that like, oh yes, this is like, we're going to be a full-time hardcore band and like, we're going to do this. Or was that kind of the ambitions when you guys first started to?
No, it was never like we thought it was really cool that we were able to play CBGBs, that was huge. Hey, we could have broke up then.
Sure.
To us, that was like, wow, this is awesome. And then, and I will say, when it started to really not be fun was, on Victory, and for a little while in the late 90s, everybody talked about SoundScan. Do you remember that? What were your SoundScan numbers?
What's your first week say? Yeah, of course, very much so.
And that was so fucking lame. Like, that was like the low point for me. Like, I was just like, wow, this sucks, man. I don't want to talk about this shit with anybody. I don't give a fuck about that. I just want to I'm just putting off being an adult for a little while. I don't want to be in a competition with anybody.
Sure, totally. Well, it felt like that. Because I guess by kind of default, were you sort of the, quote unquote business guy of the band, like booking shows and stuff like that and dealing with the record label? Or was that something that was left with somebody else?
Me, yeah.
Okay. All right.
No.
And so I imagine because of that, as that stuff started to become more serious, it really, like you said, it really kind of took the wind out of your sails.
Oh, it definitely did. I mean, it wasn't the same. And don't get me wrong, it was always fun, but then, like it was just more pressure, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it was still fun. Like, I remember those tours during that time period were great. I mean, I had a lot of fun on those tours, met a lot of great people. It's just, it started to be a little bit more connected to business. And, that wasn't what I was into at all.
Right. Yeah. Like that was not the function of why you played music. Right. And I would say, I mean, this is just from my casual observation, like, basically in the late 90s, after you guys had kind of, come back and put out the record on Victory and you started to get tours and stuff like that. That was kind of the most, I guess, active you guys were as far as like a, for lack of a better term, full-time touring band. Is that correct or no?
Right. Yeah, that was definitely the most active we were from. And I would even push it because 98, we did a bunch, like it seemed like every weekend we were playing with Buried Alive, or we were playing with Blood for Blood, or we were playing with Reach the Sky. Every weekend you could find any combination of that bill somewhere. But then right around 99, we really picked it up and started to tour. We did a Buried Alive tour. We did a Turmoil tour. I mean, we were really on the road a lot in 99, 2000, 2001. We were on the road a lot. We did a tour with Dying Fetus, Shadows Fall.
Sure.
A lot of stuff. And I mean, and then everything started to be I don't know. The steam kind of I can't even explain it. And I'm not a very social guy. Like, I guess that quietness always has been there, and like, I guess like socially awkward, I guess I would say.
Sure.
Like, and I didn't really I liked the beginning of a tour and I liked the end of a tour, and I always hated the middle of a tour. The beginning was great. We're on the road. This is awesome. Hey, let's live like a Viking. And then it was like, wah, wah, wah. Oh, another fucking town. Another, gotcha, dirty clothes, always around people. And I never want to be around people, And then the end was great because it's like, okay, got 2 more weeks to go, and then I'd be alone again for a while. Sure.
No, I think, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's a really, when you start a band, when you start, going on the road, you can understand that you are like, maybe an introvert or an extrovert, and you kind of start to notice how you are in the world. But, there's nothing like a tour is not real life. Like, it's a suspended state of animation where you're, like you said, you're traveling like a Viking from town to town. And then, you want to have an option to be able to, for people such as yourself, to be able to disconnect and like not be around, not be on top of your fellow 4 band members. But there's no option to do that. So I can see where it would be like, hey, I got another 20 days of this. Like, I can't handle this.
Right.
Yeah.
And I will totally admit that I was the wet blanket in the band, because those other guys, they could go nonstop. And I don't know. It's just personality wise, I just need that. I've always needed that time where I'm just alone,
Sure.
And, like I said, in the middle, it was always like, oh, when is this going to end?
Right. Like when is this going to end? Because I need my break.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, I'm guessing that, as you started to kind of get on that wheel of touring, and you started to feel like this cycle kept kind of going in and out, that just, weighed on you to where you're like, all right, I can't do this anymore. I got to step away from it. That's obviously what caused the band to, basically be inactive for, that period of years.
Right. And then, Matt, who I'm still really good friends with from Hatebreed, was in the band. And, Matt really wanted to be on the road and go for it. So God bless him, he fell into something much better and bigger for him, because of it, because, he went from that into Hatebreed.
Totally.
Because he was actually the touring drummer, for all that time.
Sure. So yeah, he was excited to do a more, solid full-time thing than something that was, kind of in and out.
Right. Exactly.
And so, as you were kind of, doing this touring thing and, trying to, piece those things together, were you, I'm guessing that, the idea of teaching was always kind of like, in your head, like, were you substitute teaching as you were touring? And, because clearly I'm sure you weren't like living off of the band. So what were you kind of doing on the side of the band, so to speak?
I was doing this. I was going to school every time the band like wasn't on the road. So I would go like a semester, and then I would take off a semester. And while I was doing that, I was lucky enough. I was a custodian in the same school district that I work in now. And they would always take me back. So I would come back, I would do that, and then I would go to college. And then, when the band would go on the road, I would quit my job, and then I would not go to school that next semester, and then I would go and, be on the road for a year or take a year off of school. That's why it took me like 8 million years to get any kind of degree. So that's pretty much how I worked it. And then when we were done in 2001, the only thing I had to do was student teach. And the funny thing is, as soon as I got done student teaching, and as soon as I started teaching for real, All Out War started again. So we started playing again. We didn't tour, but we did we went to Europe. We did
Leftovers or the DMV
Number 97.
or house cleaning or Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, I'm David Eagleman. I have a new podcast called Inner Cosmos on iHeart. I'm a neuroscientist and an author at Stanford University, and I've spent my career exploring the 3-pound universe in our heads. On my new podcast, I'm going to explore the relationship between our brains and our experiences by tackling unusual questions so we can better understand our lives and our realities. Like, does time really run in slow motion when you're in a car accident? Or can we create new senses for humans? Or what does dreaming have to do with the rotation of the planet? So join me weekly to uncover how your brain steers your behavior, your perception, and your reality. Listen to Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Rosie O'Donnell, and I've got a new podcast called Onward with me, Rosie O'Donnell, on iHeart. I'm 60 years old now. Believe that? Yes, it's the truth. So I figure 2/3 of my life are done. 0 to 30, 30 to 60, and now I'm in the 60 to 90 if I'm lucky. Mostly, this part of my life is just about moving forward. And I thought, what a wonderful way to do it. With a podcast that I can sit down here in my home with people I love and admire, people I've worked with, people I've gotten to be friends with, and some family friends that feel like the real deal. Like who, you might ask? Natasha Lyonne, Jennifer Lewis, Ricky Lake, Fran Drescher, Sharon Gless, Kathy Griffin, Cameron Manheim. The list goes on and on. Listen to Onward with Rosie O'Donnell, a proud part of the Outspoken Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Bunch of things with Ringworm. I remember we did spring break. I did a tour with Ringworm. I think I did 2 spring break tours with Ringworm, 2003 and 2004, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. That's funny. So yeah, it was just always, even though you had these other plans, like All Out War just kind of always kept popping in where it's like, oh yeah, I guess we'll do this. Like, yeah, sure. Of course. That sounds like fun.
Well, that's how it's been, ever since 2001, really. I mean, we just, every once in a while, just, okay, yeah, all right, we'll do this. Let me call these guys and see if they want to do it. All right, we'll do it.
Sure.
In a world where everyone is confined to their homes, society begins its largest binge watch to date. In the hallowed library of Hulu, or perhaps on a shelf of DVDs you haven't looked at in a decade, is a show that perfectly encapsulates life in the early aughts and launched a friendship that would inspire millions. Hi, I'm Zach Braff.
And I'm Donald Faison.
In 2001, we starred in Scrubs, a sitcom that revealed a glimpse of what it was like to survive a medical internship. As Turk and JD, we explored guy love.
Nearly 20 years later, a lot has changed. We're not Supermen, but we're still best friends. Given the mandatory lockdown, there's no better time to relive the series that brought us together in the first place. And we're doing it with a podcast.
That's right, people. We're going to bring friends and crew members and fellow cast members and writers. And guess what? We're going to even invite some of you to call into the podcast and ask all the questions you want of the entire Sacred Heart staff.
Join us for Fake Doctors, Real Friends on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
This is kind of, tangential, but something I find really humorous and funny, where, bands obviously have Wikipedia pages and, that exists, but sometimes they're more funny than they're supposed to be. And I think this line in your guys' Wikipedia page is extremely hilarious. So, towards the beginning, I'll quote it at you because I'm sure you don't stalk your own Wikipedia page. But so it's like the band played their first show together in Newburgh, New York at the Hudson Valley Skate Park in 1991. This is the part that's funny. A riot broke out, resulting in the police intervening. Which is like, the second sentence in the All Out War Wikipedia page. And I just think that's very funny because whether or not that's true is kind of like, All Out War does get lumped into this, like, whatever, meathead jock, like, we'll beat people up. Not saying that, you guys endorse that behavior or what have you, but you guys have always kind of been tangentially linked to that, like, violent aspect of it. Is that something that, obviously you've been aware of, or is that something that you're just like, well, like, yeah, I mean, our shows are violent, but it's not like we're, throwing out, chains into the crowd and asking people to beat each other up or anything.
Right. I mean, we've been connected to that, and it's really funny because, I mean, if you've ever, talked to us or met us, we're not like that at all. I mean, a lot of the craziness happened like early on because that was what was going on in the scene. I mean, it was so stupid, but it was real. There was so much, like, I think what happened early on is the shows in New York City were getting violenter, and people up here wanted to be them. You know what I'm saying? Like, there was a lot of, like, dummies that really wanted to, prove themselves there. So the shows up here were really violent, and then who was the band? We were it was us. So we really got connected to all of that stuff. But the guys in the band, we were, and don't get me wrong, like, we weren't, totally passive or anything like that. Sure. But at the same time, it was definitely not something the band was promoting at all. And the funny thing, and in some ways the sad thing, is all these years later, we can't, seem to disconnect from that. Like, that just follows us. And it's something that was a thing so long ago, and it's just one of those, it just drags and like, we met so many different bands. Like, it's funny that you said that because so many bands expected us to be one way, and then we're totally like, wait a second, you guys aren't like that at all. Turmoil was one of them.
Sure.
When we toured with Turmoil. And the funny thing about Turmoil too is because we totally expected them to be something that they weren't. We were like, I'll never forget that show. That tour started out in Omaha, Nebraska. So, and I have no idea who routed it that way, but both of us drove all the way to Omaha. So they're like from Pennsylvania and the eastern side of Pennsylvania at that. So we drove out to Omaha, and it was like one of these strange, like, awkward standoffs where we didn't want to talk to them because we thought that they were like totally like, artsy and, straight edge, whatever kind of guys, and they thought we were total goons, so it's like two bands just kind of at the venue, sit in their van, like, because, they didn't know anybody in Omaha and we didn't know anybody in Omaha. So who were we going to talk to? And finally, I just remember talking and then we had a great time with them because we both realized, we were nothing like what we both thought the other was.
Right. So. You were just total like, oh yeah, you're just like total goofballs that, we play like violent music, but that doesn't mean that's like who we are 24/7, 365 days a year.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, to your point, I think the best, the most important thing you said there is that, bands can exist alongside of these bands that maybe perpetuate that message a little bit more than others, but just by sheer, by sheer proximity to this, bands just get kind of lumped into it. And yeah, I think that is definitely the case with you. Of course, there are certain things that you could point to where it's like, oh yeah, the band's not doing themselves any favors by calling themselves All Out War. It's like, well, yeah, but
right.
But still, it's like, nuclear assault isn't like, propagating that, every world power needs to have nuclear warfare. It's like, that's not what they're saying.
And I don't do myself any favors because I like when the crowd is active, who wants to play to, people just standing there. But at the same time, I don't want to see anybody like quote unquote crowd killing either, which is another bizarre thing that happens today. I mean, I'd much rather have people up front, like, with the moshing behind the first few rows of people and not have like the huge horseshoe because people are afraid to get punched in the head,
Totally. Yeah, I get that. And like you mentioned earlier, you're a high school history teacher and you've been doing that for quite some time now. There are many people, and I'm sure you maybe experienced this with other people that you've kind of met over the years throughout the scenes. There is this correlation between like playing in a band and kind of the entertainment aspect of getting on stage and being a teacher, because there are other people who have followed that profession that have come from the scene that we both come from. Have you, I guess, kind of noticed that the parallels between those two things, or are those like two completely separate things in your life that you don't really, they both stay in their own lanes?
No, they're totally connected.
Okay.
The best teachers I have found are performance artists. So I'm the department chair, so it's my job to hire people. And when I'm hiring new people, I want them to come in and do a demo lesson because I want to see how they convey this stuff. I want to see them put on a show. I don't want to see like just buy the book, here you go, and I'm going to be very monotone and I'm just going to kind of do nothing, and I'm just going to try to I want to see personality. I want to see you make this stuff come alive because that's what keeps the kids' interest. And you need to really capture those kids in order to get them to perform, because let's face it, we all know what it's like to be in a class with a teacher that's painfully boring, and I without the band, I would never have been able to stand in front of a classroom because, like I mentioned earlier, I was really quiet and, very, what's the word I'm looking for here? I just wasn't very outgoing.
Reserved.
The band helped me.
Reserved.
Right. There you go. And the band helped me really, break out of that. So that helps me with my job. And like I said, I really think that good teachers are performance artists, are people that can put on a show.
No, that's a really good way of putting it. I didn't think about it in those terms, but it definitely, like you said, especially for people of a certain disposition, you do get, when you get up in front of people, just as much as, even if it's like, you playing in a band for 10 years, in front of, 40 people over those 10 years, it's still the reps of doing it and understanding that you have to capture, even if it's only 5 people in the room, you got to try to capture their attention in some capacity. And yeah, I like how you drew that parallel between, the word that you use of performance artist. Cause yeah, you want to capture a kid's attention and, there's no greater practice than, trying to whip a crowd into, excitement with a sweet mosh part or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And kind of, the last thing I wanted to pick your brain on was because you have 2 kids?
2 kids, yes.
Yeah, and, clearly as a, teacher, you're always, in front of kids and everything like that. it's kind of a two-part question. One, do, any kids do the deep Google on you and start to be like, oh, wow, like, my history teacher's in a band called All Out War. And then secondly, how do your kids react to the fact that, you play in a band that they probably don't understand and probably don't like? Like, how do those things kind of live in your life?
Well, the first one I'll take is students. They always think that they got something on me, and
sure.
The cooler ones are always like, score, and they'll show me something that they looked up or something they found on YouTube, and they'll give me the thumbs up and be like, don't worry. I mean, they would say it, but they're like, you can feel it. They're like, don't worry, I'm not gonna tell the principal. And it's like, everybody knows, it's
I'm not keeping the secret.
Everybody, or, they'll always be like, score, I know why you wear long sleeve shirts even when it's 90 degrees out, because, they'll see the tattoos or whatever, and they'll think that is something that they can, or they got over me or something. And so I always laugh at that. And then, my own kids, this is totally normal for them, especially, their mother was in Starkweather. So,
that's right. I forgot about that connection. Yeah. Okay.
So to them, this is just totally normal. People always ask me stuff like that, and they say, well, don't your kids find this weird? And it's like, no, my kids find you weird. My
they expect people to play in bands. Yeah, totally.
Michelle, still plays, and we actually are in a band together it's Michelle. She writes all the music, and I sing, and Matt from Hatebreed plays drums, and Mike from Primeval, who we talked about earlier, who was also in Demolition Hammer for a little bit.
Sure.
He plays guitar. So for my kids, this is just the world. This is just life.
Right. I totally forgot about that connection between your wife playing in Starkweather. But yeah, it makes sense where, the fact that your kids see both parents active within their artistic life, and then their other friends are like, wait, none of your parents play in a band? That's weird.
Yeah. Your parents don't have tattoos? That's strange.
Totally. That's so cool that is their common experience, and they figure out everything else being like, oh, maybe my experience isn't common, but that's weird that you don't have that. Like, that's so funny. And do they, I guess kind of on that same tip, like, do they, have they seen either you or your wife play, and like, how do they react to that?
They've seen us play on YouTube. Okay. They have not seen us live at all. Every year, because Michelle is from the Philadelphia area, so every year Michelle says she's going to bring them to This Is Hardcore, but she always backs out of bringing them at the last minute.
Sure. Well, that's
so. Maybe this year will be the year. Who knows?
Sure. Well, that is a lot to throw a kids into. I mean, not like you are going to be there for the entire day, but a festival is definitely a different experience than hey, let's go watch Dad play in front of 200 people at the local venue or whatever.
Well, Philly's easy for her because her parents are there, so she could just kind of bring the kids in and then be like, okay, see you later. We're going back to Grandma's house now.
Yeah.
That would work for her.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it sounds like people do most people refer to you as Score? Like that's what most people, or is that just like your students?
What do you mean?
I'm just saying, because you mentioned where you were saying, the student who's like, oh, hey, Score, I know this secret thing about you. So, do your students know you by Score? Does kind of the collective?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Do your friends call you Score as well? Score.
And I think for years people, especially there was this guy that used to book all the shows in Albany named Ted Etal. He's a great guy, but he used to think that was my stage name. Really, I could have thought of a way cooler stage name if I was thinking about it, but he was shocked when he found out that was my real last name, which is always funny to me.
That is amazing. Yeah, you're like, no, my last name is really Score. You're like, oh, I thought that was just a cool, you came up with that name on your own.
And then other people think I just spell it that way, like it's really spelt like some weird like SKOR, like the candy bar way. And it's like, no, it's not spelled like that. Me and the dude from Flock of Seagulls,
right?
We're both my score.
Totally, yeah.
You know?
I thought that was funny too when I was doing some research, and I was like, oh yes, like anytime a person shares a name with someone else that is kind of tangentially related to the line of work that you do, it's always like, oh, that's funny. Like I'm sure people are looking for you, and they're like, who the hell is this Flock of Seagulls dude? What the hell?
Who's this guy?
Totally.
We share a name.
Yeah, that's funny. I hope one day you play a festival so you could just randomly run into him and be like, hey, yeah, we got the same name, bud.
We might be related, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time, dude. I really appreciate you going through all this. And I if we are ever in the same room together, because I've only seen you guys play once. It was actually on that Buried Alive tour. But if we're ever in the same room again, I'll make sure to introduce myself.
Which venue was that at?
It was in Southern California. I want to say, I think I saw you guys either in Santa Barbara or because I live in like the Orange County area. So I can't remember exactly, but yeah, I definitely saw on that tour.
What was the showcase?
Yes, that's right. In Corona. Yep, that was definitely where I saw you guys. Yep,
that was with Trial. That was actually a really stacked bill because Trial played. Right?
Yes, you're right. Yeah, Trial did play. That's right. Yeah. Because and then they played.
Reach the Sky. Played.
Yep, exactly. That's right. Yeah, the showcase.
Brandon from Bleeding Through booked that show. I don't know why I remember that show so well, but I remember that show.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I think because there was always that idea that when you came through Southern California, the shows were always going to be really, really good. And so I think that, especially when you have a show where you're colliding with a bunch of different bands, it's like, oh man, this is going to be really good. And then you're like, oh yeah, this is really good. So yeah, that's awesome.
I think that probably was the best California show. And that's probably what I really remember.
Totally. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. So, but yeah, thanks for your time, Mike. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mike Score, for hanging out on the podcast. Thank you to Alec as well, the publicist who helped put this together. It's always nice when you work with publicists who know the show and know what you would like. You don't feel like they're just pitching you. It's very nice. So thank you very much, Alec. And next week, like I said, is the 7th anniversary of this particular podcast. And when I say 7th, it's not precise, but it's like, this is episode 364. So you take 52 times 7 and boom, 364. That's what we got, and that's the math that I'm doing. Because, there are occasions where I take a week off, but very rarely. So next week is John Dyer Baisley from Baroness. I'm so excited about this one because I've been obsessed with Baroness ever since they started putting out their EPs on, was it Hyper Realist? I can't remember the name of the label. It's just escaping my mind right now, but I just love Baroness so much and saw them at the Fest in 2011, 12. It's been forever ago, but I respect what he does. I respect what the band has gone through because they went through a horrific bus accident a couple of years ago. And many people would have just been like, well, that's kind of the end of that. And, maybe John will continue to do the awesome artwork that he does from a painting perspective. But yeah, there's just so much great stuff. And John hung out for a really intense conversation. It was I think I had 45 or 50 minutes with him. But man, we got into it. It was great. So that's what we got next week. And like I always tell you, please be safe, everybody. Special shout out to DripDrop because they are the best way to battle dehydration. It is a nice powder that you pour into a drink and has 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of sports drinks. You can try it before a run, after a workout, or whenever you need that little boost to help you feel better. So go to dripdrop.com and use the code WORDS to get 20% off your purchase. That's dripdrop.com and use the code WORDS. I love this stuff. Now, for real. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Jabberjaw Podcast Network, jabberjawmedia.com. Shh.
Hi there, I'm Zach Braff.
And I'm Donald Faison.
We're real-life best friends, but we met playing fake-life best friends, Turk and JD, on the sitcom Scrubs.
20 years later, we've decided to rewatch the series one episode at a time. and put our memories into a podcast you can listen to at home.
We're going to get all our special guest friends like Sarah Chalk, John C. McGinley, Neil Flynn, Judy Reyes.
Show creator Bill Lawrence, editors, writers, and even prop masters will tell us about what inspired the series and how we became a family.
You can listen to the podcast Fake Doctors, Real Friends with Zach and Donald on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Leftovers or the DMV
Number 97.
or house cleaning or Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, I'm David Eagleman. I have a new podcast called Inner Cosmos on iHeart. I'm going to explore the relationship between our brains and our experiences by tackling unusual questions like, can we create new senses for humans? So join me weekly to uncover how your brain steers your behavior, your perception, and your reality. Listen to Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The thing that I'm most nosy about is other people's finances. I just want to ask people, how much money do you make, and what have you figured out about money that the rest of us haven't? I'm Maya Lau, and this is Other People's Pockets, the show where I ask people about their money, because salary transparency is important, and because we can all learn something from other people's financial mistakes and money hacks. Other People's Pockets is a co-production of Pushkin Industries and Little Everywhere. Listen to Other People's Pockets on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.